Continuation of Chapter 8. "Now you're in for it," Corby muttered apprehensively for Pat's benefit. "Like as not we're plumb surrounded." "And I suppose this is where you expect to climb off the hook with the help of your pals here, huh?" Sam hurled at him carelessly. "Yes, I do," yelled Buff with sudden unexpected heat. "You're begging for it, you three, and now you can have it." Pat, meanwhile, had been busily taken in this owl hoot setup. He saw the man beside the cabin make a beckoning gesture. In another moment, several other booted and heavily armed men strolled into the open, boldly staring. "Well, look who's here," one of them called out roughly. "If it ain't Buffy himself." And they gazed with brazen curiosity at Pat and their partners. "Yeah, it's Buff," Corbin threw back with reckless vigor. "Look alive, you birds, and get me out of this fix." If Pat had entertained any doubts about the nature of their reception here, he need not have worried. Their effrontery in coming here at all gained them a kind of a prestige in the hard eyes of this lawless crew. The outlaws made no move whatsoever, continuing to absorb and stare. "Well, look at Buffy here, would ya? Seems he's in a wee bit of a pickle." One of them gawped cynically, perfectly understanding his predicament. "Looks like he kind of got tangled up in a rope." One of them, obviously their leader by his raffish appearance, walked forward unhurriedly. Pat pushed out to meet this man, his manner easy. He dropped an offhanded greeting. "Howdy," he let drop with cool inconsequence. "It seems that you boys here are acquainted with our friend here." The black eyes of the other man slashed into him like knives, taking his measure keenly and manifestly approving of what he saw. "Oh, we know him. By name, anyhow," he allowed cautiously. "Expect you're a Colorado sheriff, mister. You got the look of it. Too bad you're over in Wyoming now." Pat ignored this touch of arrogant defense in his tone. "I'm not the law." He shook his head, smiling thinly. "Far from it. Maybe I better add that I've no concern with you boys whatsoever. All I want," he proceeded bluntly, "is to get this lug off my back so I can shove on with my business." The outlaw's glance followed Pat's gesture, alighting upon Corbin without notable favor. "Been bothering you some, has he?" he grunted, oblivious to the laughter of his fellows, plainly directed at Corby. "Well, Buff's nosy. I know that from past experience." "Well, can't say I really need him any longer myself," Pat thrust on with calm assurance. "Maybe you'll agree to take charge of him while we go on our way." The outlaw leader scrutinized Sam and Ezra with curiosity, but he voiced none of his pressing questions. "I'll do that," he nodded, "if you agree to forget you ever saw this place." Pat signed an assent, tossing the man his sack of makins and deftly catching it on its return. "I'll be anxious to forget old Buffy here," he promised, lighting up his own smoke. "That I am dead certain to forget where it was that I lost him. Much obliged, friend. Here's hoping that we never happen to meet again." Despite Corby's furious outburst at this betrayal, not a man amongst the outlaws offered to question Pat's spoken word. He did not wait for more. Dropping the lead rein of Corbin's stallion, he turned his own bronc and in silence, except for the crack of the hooves, jogged on through the rocky pass with Sam and Ezra close at his wake. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. Thickening dusk found the trio a dozen miles north, deep in a rolling, thinly grassed country which seemed boundless. They pushed on till a few gnarly willows along a dry creek bed afforded scant wood for a fire. After watering the broncs out of canteens with the use of a hat, they ate supper and sipped a frugal coffee ration while they relaxed. "You figure that business at Corby back there hooks up with Larkin's Pitchstone crowd with that bunch of outlaws?" Ezra broke a silence to ask, little doubting the answer. Pat shrugged. "Well, it certainly means he ain't all fussy about who he hires. Beyond that, I'm not prepared to do any more guessing." Salone scrutinized him scornfully. "Hell, Stevens, you're a regular old maid. According to your own story, that crowd, from Larkin right on down, is a match for Butch Cassidy's wild bunch. They stole Bart's ranch outright, and they're aiming to make her stick. It won't faze 'em any if it leads to a murder or two." "I can well believe that," Pat grinned. "But it's not myself that I'm trying to prove that to." Sam threw a boot at him, and then forced to hop around on one foot till he reached his bedroll. "Well, you keep your dang secrets," he groused, crawling into his blankets, and presented his broad, stubby back to the others. "Just wait till I learn something, then trying to get it out of me." "Oh, don't worry, Wart. You're safe," Pat laughed at him. He and Ezra turned in shortly, and there was only the muted sound of the horses cropping grass tufts and the lonely wails of coyotes from the far hills. Shoving on the next day, they swung northwest to avoid the Medicine Brow Mountains, and for 2 days traveled across these vast plains. Fleecy white clouds sailed majestically overhead in the fathomless sky, the tangy odor of sagebrush ever present to their nostrils. If they saw an occasional elk in the pine fringes and the ridges, or a dusty freighter bowling along a snaky alkali trail out of the flats, that was all. On the 3rd day, Pat sat straighter in the saddle, and more of his lithe, tireless drooped out of him. "What's rolling you now?" growled Salone, noting his young friend's impatience over small delays. "We ought to hit Sundance today," returned Pat cheerfully. "We'll haul up there for a breather and take us a look around." "Well, I'm ripe for some time in town myself," grunted Ezra. "It'd give us a chance to get out of all this darn dust." Stevens cocked a shaggy brow at him. "You and your dust," he murmured, for the weather had turned ideal with a fresh breeze and a clear, warm sunshine. "Must be that you're itching to finger over a poker deck and after a long layoff of several days." Sam richly relished the chuckle this remark occurred, if his lanky partner did not. Ezra barked at him, and the pair fell to bickering betwixt themselves, a haggling exchange which served at least to pass the time, and lasted until Pat put an end to her. "That must be Sundance yonder," he interrupted, pointing out a dwarfed clump of buildings far ahead. "Let's shove along for dinner, or would you prefer to chew the clout a while with each other?" The irritable partners chippered up wonderfully at the prospect of change. In less than an hour, the three rode into the little Wyoming town, Ezra and Sam gawking at everything in sight, and Pat laughing at them. "Welcome to our metropolis," he jibed. "I know you'd never laid eyes on a real cow town before." But there was, in fact, a certain liveliness about Sundance, Wyoming, which made it different from the average sleepy supply towns of their acquaintance. It was Pat who put his finger unerringly on the underlying reason for this. "We're only a few miles from the Montana border," he announced. "Even down here they feel the excitement of the mining camps in the mountains. There must be a stage line that goes through here, and I've seen a lot of freighting outfits here. Must be that there's money in this town, and probably plenty of rough customers. I reckon I don't need to warn you to keep your nose clean, do I?" They left their broncs at the public stable, where they likewise washed up, and walked out to look the town over. The number of busy storage barns and mercantile establishments was far outnumbered by the saloons and gambling joints that lined the main street. "Come on," Sloane urged shortly, slapping his stomach resoundingly. "Let's put on a feed bag. I'm plumb holla." "And so is your legs," snorted Ezra, in derisive reference to Sam's famed capacity for food. But the lanky redhead did not hang back as they turned into the stockman's restaurant, and all three gave a good account of themselves that the counterman laughingly slid Sam an extra slab of pie in recognition of his phenomenal appetite. Ezra finished his coffee and stood up with a happy sigh, glancing past the grimy window as he did so. Abruptly he stilled in a slitted-eyed fix, and a short second later he thumbed Stevens urgently in the region of the short ribs. "Hey, take a gander." Pat turned to gaze out the window, and grew equally immobile. His mouth pursed in a soundless whistle, for he saw at once the smart buckboard which had caught Ezra's attention. Bowling up the street behind two brisk, well-curried bays, the man was in the driver's seat. A cigar clamped in his jaws was no other than Chest Denton. Sam saw it as well. "Rope and earmark me a 8-carat dope," he exploded softly. You did know why you was coming up this way, Stevens." "Well, if you mean him," Pat gestured towards the street, "I can't exactly confess that I was expecting to find him here, although it's interesting all the same, ain't it?" There was virtually no chance of their being observed here in the dingy restaurant, and Ezra continued to watch until Denton drove on out of sight. After paying for their meal, the three moved outside, and Ezra spoke up then, voicing his busy thoughts. "Are you keeping out of his way?" he asked. "Denton and I don't owe each other a cent, Ez." Pat's tone was serious. "Still, it's only common sense not to call ourselves to his attention. Wonder what would have brought him up here," he pursed musily. "Well, if we knowed that, there'd be no point in watching him," retorted Sam. Pat eyed him mockingly. "So, and now you want to spy on the man, huh?" Salone's normally serene and rather vicarious face grew with exasperation. "Dang you, Stevens, you're dying to learn what his game is. Why would you lie to me?" "Did I say something wrong?" Pat was all innocence. "I know it's tough on you and Ezra being dragged away from home and knocking around from pillar to post like this. Can't take it no more like you used to, huh?" "Go to hell," Sam snarled heatedly. "I can stand more'n you can right today, and just as well you know it." It was late afternoon now, and time to hunt up a room, unless they meant to spend the night in the haymow. There would be more luxury enough for his partners, but Pat, he himself was engaging quarters in a rooming house at the edge of town. That done, he was already drawing on towards dusk, and they moved back towards the Sundance main drag, by no means ready to call it a day. They had a drink at the Palace Bar, and Ezra looked longingly towards the poker tables, but he had no real hope of indulging in his favorite vice tonight. Emerging once more, they wandered down the busy thoroughfare, fully assured that, despite its modest size, this was the most energetic town they had seen in quite some time. Mingling with the cattlemen and the cowboys were readily identifiable miners and freighters, timber cutters, and even trappers, filling the streets with a bustle of activity. "Be a needle in a haystack, hunting one man in this crowd," Ezra grumbled. Yet they found no little interest in all about them, watching men working, arguing, or at play. Sam paused to glance in through the window of a saloon as they passed, and Pat caught his one warning mutter. Stepping off the beaten path before the place, the three paused in a casual group, ignored by the men that continually shouldered by. "Inside there," Sam muttered. "Table towards the corner. There's 3 men together." Glancing in, Pat observed Ches Denton, the cattle buyer, seated at a table with two other men. They were obviously holding a conference, oblivious of the merrymakers about them, and it was Denton's companions on whom Pat fastened his keen attention. One was a big blond fellow with a handsome face. It was too handsome, the features boldly carved and arrogant in the yellow lamplight, and the other was a black-headed young fellow who made a decidedly better impression on Pat, who just now seemed uneasy. Stevens looked long, imprinting those faces into his memory. Whoever they are, Ches seems to know 'em well. He seems to be handing out some strong advice. The conference lasted for another 10 minutes, and finally the big, light-haired fellow rose. He was of impressive physique, broad of shoulders and lean in hip, and he was neatly dressed. "Let's move." Pat thrust his friends before him, starting away. "They'll be coming out in a minute." Crossing the street, over the intervening heads, they watched Denton and his companions emerge from the saloon and presently part. Pat watched till they were gone from view. "Well, how do we learn who they might be?" asked Sloane in puzzlement. "Does it matter?" countered Ezra sourly. "Maybe not." Sam lifted his pudgy shoulders. "And then again, maybe it might." "Well, let's give it a whirl." On impulse, Pat started back across the street purposefully. The others were at his heels as he walked boldly into the saloon and made straight for the bar near the table where Denton had been sitting. A silent bartender waited on them, not even glancing up. Pat delayed till he was almost done, and then spoke. "Looking for Ches Denton, the stock dealer," he said. "Maybe you know him?" There was a flash of obsidian eyes. "He was here a while ago, if that's the same feller," came the dry answer. Pat nodded. "Denton, he was waiting for a couple hombres. Wonder if he located them?" There was a longer delay this time. "I can't say, stranger," the bartender rasped at last briefly. "Why don't you ask Denton himself?" "Well, I'd do that," Pat agreed, as the man turned away. But he knew that his random fishing for information had come to naught in this quarter. A few minutes later, he led his partners outside. "He's a cagey hombre," muttered Ezra, glancing back at the barman from the door. Pat grinned. "Well, maybe it wasn't by accident that he wouldn't talk. I made my tribe. We'll forget it." It warned them to expect no help in their investigations in this lawless corner of the mountain west. "What are you going to do now?" Ezra persisted, his brow wrinkling. Pat was in no great hurry to voice his decision. "Next town over here on the Montana line is Avalanche. That's where Vern Hunter supposedly disappeared. I want Sam to take a stage up there and learn what he can about Hunter. Anything at all. Whether the man really did fade or simply take up country on a trip, or whatever happened. Think you can manage that?" The dumpy little man nodded importantly. "Don't fret. I'll bring back his pedigree and Wall Street rating. I'll even include his dog if you want." "Oh, never mind there, smart guy," Ezra roared at him, incensed over what he deemed to be an unwarranted levy. "Do as you're told and not a little bit more." Crestfallen, Sam made a pretend violent kick at Ezra's shins, narrowly missed, and backed away in an attitude of defense. Suddenly he stopped and dropped his pose. "What do you two be doing?" Pat waved a hand. "We'll watch over Denton for a day or two. I don't know what else we'll do. Do you expect a map of anything that might turn up?" he asked with exaggerated politeness. They walked down to the stage station, where it was learned that the coach for Avalanche would pull out within the hour. Sloane accordingly paid his fare, and they waited around, engaging the hostlers in talk and looking the stock in the stage barn over. As the time drew near for Sam's departure, it developed that the stage from the south was a bit late. The avalanche stage could not wait for it, but pulled out on the usual time, with Sam and a half-dozen miners aboard. Once Sam was on his way, Ezra, with all for returning to the busier parts of town, but Pat delayed, waiting for the stage station and watching all that went on. He presently startled Ezra by backing him unceremoniously into a shadowy corner and commanded for quietness. "Now what?" The lanky one growled, bristled and alert. "Take her easy," breathed Pat. "Denton's over there now. I just saw him step into the office. We'll wait a minute and see what all's going on out there." Sure enough, Ches Denton presently stepped back out of the stage station, and the pair crowded back into the dense shadow of the blacksmith shop and watching him. Instead of striding away, however, Denton strolled back and forth impatiently, glancing about. Pat finally divined what must be on his mind. "Must be waiting for the stage," he murmured. "Must be expecting someone on it." Whatever his aim, Ches revealed a marked uncertainty of manner. Once he started away, only to pause and then turn back. Others gathered before the stage office, some of them businessmen by their appearance. There was even a woman or two. It grew difficult to maintain a close watch on Denton from that distance, and Pat finally nudged Ezra to gain his attention. "Let's go. We'll work around behind the stage barn where we can get a closer look. I want to keep Denton right under my eye." Fading into the gloom, they worked up street for 100 yards and then stole across, to come back on the same side as the stage station, but with a big rambly structure of the barn between. Even as they moved quietly towards the dusky corner, the whip crack and the jingling of harness of the incoming stage could be heard, a distance from the street. Ezra snatched a hasty, "There you are," he snapped. "We turn our backs to the office for 2 minutes, and then the rat disappears." Pat had his own quick look. It was true, all trace of Denton was gone, nor was he to be spotted anywhere among the group which waited at the approaching stage. Had he simply walked off at the opportune time while they were out of sight, or had he by chance stepped into the office again to wait inside? Pat couldn't tell, but as the coach drew up with a swirl, the team stamping and blowing, and passengers began to step to the ground, he abruptly discovered, to his dismay, the probable reason for Ches Denton's interest in this particular stage. Even Ezra growled his surprise as Della Follonsbees appeared at the stage door and began to step down. So engrossed was Pat in the possible significance of her arrival that he foiled momentarily to catch the crunch of gravel directly behind him and Ezra. When he did recognize the sound, it was only just in time. Hastily yanking Ezra in through an open harness door at their side, he peered out guardedly. Before his lanky friend knew what was about, then, he stepped forward, deliberately confronting the man who stealthily advanced along the side of the barn, making for the front. The other was near, and for a second or two they stood there face to face. "Well, Denton," Pat's level tone was chilly. "Where are you going now?" Chess's start was a cruel one, but he managed to pull himself together speedily. You? Naturally, I'm just going out into the street, Stevens." He strove to brush the other off contemptuously. "Strange, when you were just out there a minute ago." "Stand aside," Chess ordered acidly, "and I'll be out of there again. I happen to be in a hurry, Stevens." "I see. Your interest wouldn't concern anyone on that particular stage, would it?" retorted Pat narrowly. Denton's surprise was rapidly giving way to anger. "Let's understand each other, mister. I don't object to falling over you anywhere my business happens to be," he snapped wickedly. "Just see to it that you tend to your own, and I'll do just the same." End of chapter 9.